which trust communities with the power to control their own destiny.
A former minister, Lord Peter Mandelson, says Labour must stay focused on the next election.
The biggest risk is that we think that the next election's in the bag, that we relax, we take it for granted. No, no, no. We have to maintain our absolute focus on voters, particularly those voters who have yet to be convinced that Labour does offer a credible, united, progressive alternative for our country.
Graphic body cam footage has been released in the US showing police in Memphis beating a black man who died 3 days later. A warning some people may find the following video distressing.
Get your hands! Mom! Mom! Hey. Give your hands!
29-year-old Tyree Nichols was kicked, punched and pepper-sprayed as he cried out for his mother. 5 black police officers have been sacked and are facing murder charges. President Joe Biden says he's outraged and has called for an end to police misconduct.
Please don't shoot me dead, I got my hands above my head. Please don't shoot me dead, I got my hands above my head.
The video has triggered fresh protests against police brutality towards black people. Demonstrations, which were mostly peaceful, have been held across several cities, including Memphis and New York. In Times Square, 3 people were arrested after police cars were damaged. There's been another suspected Palestinian shooting in Jerusalem. Police say a 13-year-old boy opened fire in the Old City. 2 people were injured before the boy was shot and injured by passers-by. The latest attack happened only a day after 7 people were killed by a gunman outside a synagogue. The violence follows the deaths of at least 9 Palestinians who were killed during a raid on the West Bank on Thursday. The Israeli army has boosted its forces in the area. And a former Conservative Party chair says a number of members feel they were denied a vote on Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister. In an interview with GBNews, Sir Jake Berry says Mr Sunak should have held an endorsement vote during the leadership contest to show he had the support of the membership.
I think even though he absolutely got the majority of members of Parliament, the Conservative members of Parliament, and I support him as Prime Minister and everything he does, there is a challenge he has is, even if it's not true, there's a perception of the Conservative Parliamentary Party now being disconnected from our membership because we didn't have that, even if it was a sort of endorsement vote.
You can see that full interview with Sir Jake Berry on Gloria Meets at 6 p.m. tomorrow. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Real Britain with Emily.
Thank you, Bethany. Welcome back to Real Britain. Here's what's coming up on the show this afternoon. Is it game over for the Tory party, with the tax chief suggesting Nadeem Sahawi did not, in fact, make an innocent error? A 24th civil servant now involved in formal complaints against Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, and with the BBC chairman accused of helping Boris Johnson secure an £800,000 loan, the Conservatives continue to slip in the polls. But do you think Rishi Sunak can channel John Major and salvage the party before the next election? Or is it time the Conservatives spent a little bit of time in opposition? And the US will send 31 powerful battle tanks to Ukraine, joining Germany in sending the weapons of war to support the fight against Russia's invasion. But is this move by NATO provoking some worrisome actions from Putin? Then later on, Nicola Sturgeon's controversial trans laws were under the spotlight this Thursday after she was forced to announce that a rapist who claimed to be female would be moved into a male prison. Is this the beginning of the end for the SNP's controversial gender recognition reform bill? I certainly hope so. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts, as always, on today's topics. Please do tweet me at GBNews, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can also watch us online on YouTube. I'll be back in just one moment. Now, earlier this week, it made massive headlines around the world that in Scotland, a convicted double rapist with male genitalia donning a peroxide blonde wig and pink handbag, was being held in a women's prison and may well have gone on to serve his full sentence there, like putting a fox in a hen house. It then came out while the rapist, formerly known as Adam Graham, awaited trial. He was actually enrolled on a beauty course that meant he watched young women strip off for spray tans. One woman, who he spray tanned, who is now aware of Graham's crimes, told BBC Scotland, "If we said anything she didn't like, she tried to say we were being transphobic." I think that if news outlets like GBNews had not made such a massive point of exposing the utter lunacy of allowing male rapists into women's prisons and allowing people to wear femininity essentially like a costume, gaming the justice system and putting female lives at risk, in my opinion, there's no way in hell Sturgeon would have backed down and said this rapist couldn't be kept in a women's prison. But because people like Nicola Sturgeon are now losing the argument, it seems they are resorting to demonising their opponents. From what I can see, the vast majority of the public do not support radical gender politics, they do not support removing safeguards for women, and they think that allowing people to self-identify as whatever gender they like fundamentally goes against common sense, and in some cases could pose serious risks. In this case, I believe Nicola Sturgeon is trying to silence you with labels. Transphobia, homophobic, racist, misogynist. These are big words that have the power to criminalise people, cost them their jobs, their friendship circles, their families, their reputation. These are really powerful words. But she said, there are people who have opposed this bill that cloak themselves in women's rights to make it acceptable. But just as they're transphobic, you'll also find they are deeply misogynist, often homophobic, possibly some of them racist as well. In my opinion, she's doing this so that the ordinary man and woman going about their daily lives who have genuine concerns about this gender politics silence themselves. So they think twice before raising their concerns at the pub or at the school gates or at a dinner party, because they're afraid of being labelled one of those criminal characteristics. I think cases like the one of a male rapist with full genitalia being placed into a women's prison are going to become more common. Questions about gender education in schools are going to be raised more frequently. Concerns about men being in women's spaces are going to grow. Do not let desperate politicians silence and slander you by sticking a label on you. We shouldn't allow anyone to use such words to bully us into silence. Do not let anyone, for that matter, tell you that what you can see with your own eyes, feel in your own gut, and know in your own mind isn't true. Right, those are my views on Nicola Sturgeon and her latest outburst, essentially saying that people who might disagree with her gender reform bill could be racist, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, of course. But we'll be coming back to that later. We'll be having a little bit of a debate on that one. But in other news, it's been another challenging week for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives as the fallout over party chairman Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs continued, with the head of HMRC casting doubt over his claims that he made an innocent error over his tax returns. And as if that weren't enough, it is believed that at least 24 civil servants have now made bullying allegations against Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab. And whether you care or not, even long-time Conservative voter Sir Rod Stewart has said it is time for a Labour government. And the British public appear to agree with him, with 50% of people in our GBNews People's poll saying they'd vote for Labour in the next general election, with just 21% now backing the Conservatives. So is the party in crisis, and can they recover before the next general election? To debate this, I'm delighted to be joined by Conservative peer Lord Daniel Moylan and, of course, Lewis Fielder as well, who is a Conservative Party-approved parliamentary candidate for the next general election. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming into the studio. Lord Moylan, please tell me, what do you think? Do you think it's right for me to characterise the party as one in crisis?
Well, I think crisis is close to it. I mean, when you're seeing a party which is in government but has that level of support in opinion polls, and not just yours, but fairly consistently and now over a period, number of months, when you have a Prime Minister who doesn't have the security of having been voted in by the party membership, you have a wholly unnecessary crisis going on about the party chairman, with increasingly serious allegations that not wholly innocent mistakes were made in relation to his tax affairs. And you see a public which, in my view, is starting to switch off from listening to even the good things the government has to say and the good things the government is doing. Then I think you can reasonably describe that as a crisis. I don't think that means it's the end. There is still time before the next general election, and the party can still pull it round. But as I think even their own election advisor told them at Chequers, according to the newspapers this week, there is a very narrow path to do that, and you have to pick your steps very, very carefully if you're going to have a chance of doing it. But I'm sure Rishi Sunak's on top of it.
Now, Lewis, in my introduction there, I spoke of the various scandals, allegations against members of the party and, well, cabinet ministers. But really, fundamentally to voters, I would argue it's the issues, the real issues, the economy, the NHS, the migration crisis, the small boats crisis, that are what people will vote in the next election. That will be what decides their vote. How do you think they're getting on in that respect? Because it seems there's all these distractions.
Yeah, I think it's important to, as we look at these polls and talk about a general election, to remember that that could be 2 years away at the moment. The latest it can happen is January 2025, and 2 years, let alone 18 months, is a very long time in British politics nowadays, as we've seen in recent years. But I think on the issues, at the beginning of this year, the Prime Minister set out his 5 priorities for the government: to halve inflation, to grow the economy, to bring down the national debt, to stop the small boats crisis, and to bring down NHS waiting lists. Exactly the issues that you've just mentioned that I think are at the top of voters' minds at the moment. And so I think they're the right priorities for the government, and that when it comes to that election, and we must remember that general elections are not just about looking back and giving the people their ability and time to judge a government on its 4 or 5 years in government, but also the parties will lay out their manifestos and present their vision for the United Kingdom, and people will vote on that vision as well. And so whilst I think it's easy to think, because the Conservative Party has been in government for a long time now, that the voters will just want to give us a kicking, if you look at what happened in 2019, we'd had 3 years of Theresa May, Parliament in turmoil, and then when we went to that general election and it was Boris Johnson versus Jeremy Corbyn, we won an overwhelming landslide majority at that point.
But that was a very particular scenario, and that's not what voters are going to have to choose from come the next election, are they? It's going to be very difficult for Rishi Sunak to bring this back at this point.
Well, yes, I mean, it is going to be very difficult. I think Lewis is right. I mean, the Prime Minister has picked up key issues that people are very concerned about. The question now is delivery. And on top of that, I think he still has to establish himself in the minds of the voters as somebody who can paint a picture of the sort of Britain that the Conservative Party offers you, by contrast to the sort of Britain that Labour is offering.
Well, the problem is...
And at the moment, we don't see a sufficient blue water, as it's sometimes called, between the parties. And we don't have a clear idea of what sort of... We know that the Conservative Party is committed to lower taxes, but we're giving people higher taxes. Well, which is it? Are we a high tax or a low tax party? Where's he taking us at the end of this? That hasn't been set out. It's not just on tax, but on other things. Well, he's got an opportunity to do that, but I think the time is running out. Otherwise, he won't establish himself in the voters' minds as offering a vision.
Yeah, I mean, Lewis, it's very difficult indeed for Rishi Sunak to stand up and say the country's in a better state than when the Conservatives took office in many ways. They said that they would bring immigration down. They demonstrably haven't. They said that they'd keep the NHS in a fit state. It isn't in one. Taxes are higher than ever before, or at least for many decades. Can they blame this on the pandemic, really, at this stage?
No, and I think it's right that that focus on delivery is what we've got to do between now and the next general election, so that against those 5 priorities, people can really see progress. But I think it's equally right to say there does have to be clear blue water between the 2 parties, that on things like taxing and spending at the moment, I think many voters who don't follow politics on a daily basis would say that Keir Starmer's Labour Party is worth a shot at this point. And I think we need real Conservative policies. You've just talked about in your previous story things like the trans rights issues in Scotland. I think people have had enough of this Wokism that's infected our society, and I think there's an opportunity for the Conservative Party to make itself really clear that we are on the side of normal people here who find all of this utterly bonkers. And we're not just going to react to it as it happens. We're going to have clear policies to stop it, and things like lower taxes, things that people always look to the Conservative Party for.
But Lord Moylan, if you were out on the doorstep trying to encourage people to vote Conservative, what on earth would you say? Because it does not look like the government has lived up to the expectations it set itself.
Well, first of all, I'd fall back on the standard thing that many people do use on the doorstep. I'd point out how utterly useless Keir Starmer is. But in terms of the Conservative, and he is, but the Conservative Party, in terms of the Conservative
It's not enough,
Party,
is it?
In terms of the Conservative Party, I think most people understand that since 2019, we've had some terrible blows delivered to the economy. They understand that. But what they want to see is a plan and competence, a plan for getting out of it and competence in delivering it. And that hasn't been set out yet. I think if you say to people, I'd say on the doorstep, it has been very difficult, but we have a plan, we know what we're doing, and we're going to deliver this. And this is where we're taking you. This is the sort of Britain that we want to live in, we think you want to live in. Then I think people would give you a chance and come with you, because they recognise that COVID and Russia invading Ukraine, these are things that are not the government's fault. They came from other countries, they've come from elsewhere. And we've had to manage them. So I think people would recognise that, but I don't feel that's quite what the story the government's getting across. And that's why I don't think it's just enough to say, I've picked your top 5 concerns and I'm going to deal with them. It has to be set in a bigger vision.
Yes, anyone can do that. Anyone can say, oh, this is what you care about based on opinion polls. It's not very difficult. It's about how you then handle those issues going forward and how you make people's lives fundamentally better, or at least allow them to be. But I think one thing, Lewis, lastly, is that there's a lot of confusion when people look at the government. For example, over immigration. You've got Suella Braverman being very clear that she wants to get numbers down, even if it means cracking down on the number of foreign students. Yet then you have the Treasury, of course, saying, no, we need this for economic growth. We need more immigration, not less. What is it? What are people actually voting for when they put their cross in the Conservative box?
Well, they're not voting to be run by the Treasury. And
Lord Moylan, Lewis needs to have the final word. Would you agree with that? They're not voting to be run by the Treasury.
Yeah, I think people vote exactly as you say, for a better life, right? So we need over the next couple of years to paint that picture for them of what are the next 5 years in this country going to look like. But we do also need to reflect on, we have achieved some great things in this period of time. COVID, of course, has knocked things off course, but remember how we reacted with the vaccine situation at the time, much unlike the EU and the catastrophic response that they had to it. We were elected to get Brexit done, and we've done that. We got it done. We now need to take proper advantage of it.
Well, that could be a whole nother conversation. Of course, Jeremy Hunt has said that he wants to make the most of Brexit, but I'm not sure I believe him, to be honest. Judging from his previous voting record. But thank you very much indeed. That was, of course, Lord Daniel Moylan and Conservative Party-approved parliamentary candidate Lewis Filder with me in the studio. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Now, plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. We've got, after the break, the US sending 31 powerful battle tanks to Ukraine, joining Germany in sending the weapons of war to support the fight against Russia's invasion. But is this move by NATO provoking Putin? But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Hello there, hope you're enjoying your weekend so far. I'm Jonathan Vautry, here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. We will increasingly see the winds strengthen across northern areas of the UK into Sunday, but for now, winds are relatively light thanks to high pressure that's pushing its way across the UK. We do just have to watch out for this cold front that's slowly sinking southwards. It is bringing some patchy rain and drizzle to some areas, and that will move its way into Wales, central areas of England into this evening, but it is remaining fairly cloudy throughout the night. There could be some clearer spells during the evening across Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland, Northern England that will allow a patchy frost to develop, but as the cloud fills its way in and the breeze begins to strengthen, we will see temperatures more around low single figures in most towns and cities. But into the start of Sunday morning, this is when we'll really start to see those winds strengthening across the northwest as a more expansive area of rain begins to push its way in. This could certainly be heavy at times as we start off the day. Elsewhere, once the rain and drizzle does eventually clear its way off to the south, Sunday will be a largely dry day, but another cloudy one, just the odd bright spell here and there. Temperatures-wise, holding up around 8 to 9 degrees across southern areas, but actually 10, 11, maybe even 12 degrees for the likes of Aberdeen with those winds coming up from the south. Into tomorrow evening, then, that frontal system is going to gradually push its way across many areas. Well, we'll see some clearer spells develop behind that, but also a rash of showers pushing in for Scotland, 50-mile-an-hour gusts associated with these showers, and some hail in there as well. But by the time we get to Monday morning, that front will eventually clear its way off across southern areas. So for many of us, the start of the new working week is looking like a fairly pleasant one with some sunny intervals in there. That's thanks to the ridge of high pressure, but as we move throughout the rest of the week, our attentions turn to this low pressure centre, and that squeeze in the isobars across Scotland could provide some fairly blustery and windy conditions, particularly towards the end of Tuesday. So do just watch out for that. Goodbye.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Yes, welcome back. This is Real Britain on GB News, on your TV, online and digital radio. Now, speaking after Germany's decision to send Leopard tanks to Ukraine, Germany's foreign minister said, "We are fighting a war against Russia and not against each other." This was then used by Russia to suggest that the West is waging a premeditated war against the country, despite Berlin's stance that it does not want NATO to become directly involved in the conflict. Germany then accused Russia of twisting its foreign minister's words about the war in Ukraine to serve their purposes. So does Germany sending the tanks risk escalating the likelihood of direct conflict between NATO and Russia? Or are these fears overblown? The former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chip Chapman, joins me now to give his thoughts. So I'll pose that question to you there directly.
Well, there's a difference between war, the political objective for which war is fought, and warfare, the act of fighting. And war, those political objectives, is a political meaning. And no country in NATO has said it's at war, so they don't perceive themselves to be at war. If you're from the Russian perspective, both Lavrov and Peskov, the foreign minister and spokesman for Putin, have said we're almost at war with NATO. And the reason they say that is they've got to have a bogeyman to try and stabilise their home front. Now, we are not directly fighting Russia, and we won't be directly fighting Russia, and we've given them weapons for self-defence. So the notion that we are at war with Russia is false.
Well, then the German foreign minister shouldn't have said that, should she?
She shouldn't have, but she's not the prime decision maker. It's the same as the defence minister this week speaking out of turn and was slapped down before the decision to send tanks were sent. Now, in terms of the escalation, you can escalate in 7 ways. You can escalate by targets, objectives, weapons, geography, rhetoric, domains or mobilisation. And every time we give a new capability to the Russians, there's always a rhetorical escalation from the Russians, and their escalation there is proportionate to the amount of capability that we give to the Ukrainians. So we've seen this from the off. It first started on the 11th of March last year when they attacked Lavrov, which is just over the border between Poland and Ukraine, in Ukrainian territory, because of the provision of weapons starting to flow there.
So what does this mean for the conflict? Because Germany, after, being persuaded, I imagine it took them a while to come to the decision to send these tanks to Ukraine for many reasons. Perhaps you could detail those reasons for us. Why did it take Germany so long to actually say, yes, we are going to send these tanks to Ukraine to help them?
Well, you'd have to go back 11 months to the start of the war. So Germany initially sent 5,000 helmets. Why 5,000 helmets and no kinetic warfighting?
For which
material?
they were ridiculed at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's partly to do with their history. They fought 2 wars unsuccessfully in the 20th century. And they have seen that the futility of force from their perspective, not the utility of force. Wars achieved nothing. And of course, that affected their political means, that they believed in engagement. Ostpolitik was the thing that ended the Cold War, not hard power against the old Soviet Union. So they've seen a big turnaround in that. And it's most evident, for example, in part of the governing coalition is the Green Party. The reason the Green Party in Germany have actually given their authority for tanks and offensive material is because of their stance on human rights, justice, and all these things that they see that Russia is destroying.
Now, a lot of people watching this will be thinking, for how long can this go on? What effect will these tanks have? Will they hasten the end of this bloody conflict? Because they may well lead to more and more lives dying on both sides.
Well, more people will die on both sides, but you then have to look at why fighting stops. Fighting stops for 3 reasons, either because of decisive military victory, and these tanks and a combined arms combination give you the potential ability to do that. Secondly, fighting stops because of the improbability of victory. We get to a negotiated settlement. That's unlikely whilst we've got 4 illegally occupied oblasts. Or thirdly, because of the cost to either side, economically, politically, industrially or population. That is why the Russians, for example, have what we call this deep battle attack on the infrastructure, trying to break the will of the Ukrainian people, and for the Ukrainian people, therefore, to say to their elected politicians, you must go for a ceasefire and concede. The Ukrainian people don't look like they're doing that at the moment. Every time the Russians attack, the popularity of Zelensky in not trading land for peace goes up.
Well, presumably, handing over these weapons to Ukraine and its military, the intention is that this will stop the conflict or lead to a halt in the conflict. Why would we essentially equip Ukraine unless we thought that it would hasten a solution?
That's right. There's 4 of their oblasts, the equivalent of counties in
But do you
UK.
believe that it will hasten the end of this war?
I believe it will hasten the end of the war in combination with 2 things which will probably come in the next 1 or 2 months. Firstly, that's more precision strike, because precision can defeat mass, but it takes time. And secondly, the next contact group meeting in Ramstein, the last one was the 8th, the next one is the 9th, is going to look at aviation and air power. The best thing is to have air power in combination with that land offensive capability, manoeuvre capability. That's the way you would defeat an army.
Well, I hope you're right. And I hope that solution does come sooner rather than later. It is just coming up to the 1st anniversary, is it not, on the 24th of February. And there are reports that Putin is about to launch yet another offensive. So fingers crossed, not more. It's just so many lives are being lost. It is pretty brutal stuff. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio. That was, of course, former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chip Chapman. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. Now you're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. After the break, Nicola Sturgeon's controversial trans law were under the spotlight this Thursday after she was forced to announce that a rapist who claimed to be female would be moved into a male prison. Is this the beginning of the end for the SNP's controversial gender recognition reform bill? But first, let's take a check on the news headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2:32. I've got your top stories from the GB newsroom. 276 Flybe staff have been made redundant, with the airline going into administration for the second time in 3 years. Around 75,000 people have had their flights cancelled, and the UK Civil Aviation Authority is urging customers not to travel to airports. Flybe returned to the skies last April after it collapsed in 2020, operating flights on 21 routes to 17 destinations. A murder investigation has been launched after a 15-year-old girl was stabbed in Hexham. A 16-year-old boy is in hospital after suffering serious but not life-threatening injuries, with Northumbria Police saying it followed a suspected assault. The force says a 16-year-old boy has been arrested and remains in police custody. The head of the RMT union says its members will make a decision on whether to accept the latest and final offer from the rail delivery group by the 8th of February. Mick Lynch says the union is holding discussions with members across the country over the next 10 days. But he told GB News the terms of the offer are really poor and he doesn't feel optimistic. Sir Keir Starmer says Labour has reformed under his leadership. Addressing the London Labour conference, he said the message at the next general election must be that the party is different to the one that Britain rejected in 2019. He also vowed to build a fairer, greener country and told members not to be complacent. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Emily will be back with you in just a second.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah.
Oh, Eamon.
Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it.
Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back. This is Real Britain on GB News, on your TV, online and digital radio. Now, Nicola Sturgeon has said opponents of her gender reform bill use women's rights as a cloak for transphobia. Speaking after her announcement that a rapist, Isla Bryson, previously Adam Graham, who now identifies as a woman, will be moved to a male prison, she said. There are people who have opposed this bill that cloak themselves in women's rights to make it acceptable. But just as they're transphobic, you'll also find that they're deeply misogynist, often homophobic, possibly some of them racist as well. Of course, she names no one there. Her controversial self-ID law appeared to be thrown into disarray this week after the decision to move the prisoner to a male prison. He, of course, was being kept in a segregation unit at a female prison up till then. Now, joining me now to debate this is political strategist and former political secretary for Tony Blair, John McTernan. Thank you very much, John. And in the studio, the senior editor at Compact magazine, Nina Power. Now, Nina, seeing as you're in the studio with me, what is your take on this utter lunacy?
Well, I think reality is crashing down around Nicola Sturgeon's being. I think her kind of desperation to try to link legitimate and totally reasonable criticism and opposition to the housing of male prisoners with women, where she tries to link it to sort of racism and homophobia, I mean, is extremely desperate. I think it sounds like she's a sort of 17-year-old arguing with her parents, trying to sort of associate all these negative things together, and she's not sort of taking any of the reasonable position seriously at all. And I think, I wonder if it's curtains.
Also, it is a crime, hate speech, hate crime, to be some of these things, to be homophobic, to be racist, to be transphobic. These are quite the allegations, and yet she names no one, presumably because if she called the likes of J.K. Rowling any of these terms, she'd have a lawsuit on her hands. John, do you think this changes things? Do you think this story may be a watershed moment when it comes to gender politics?
I think it's possibly a watershed moment in the impression that Nicola Sturgeon likes to give to Scotland. She likes to be the leader of the nation. She likes to be the person who makes all the decisions. That's why she's centralised everything. And there's no longer a series of different regional police forces. There's one, Police Scotland. All the centralisation means everything is her decision, which actually means everything's her responsibility. And the governor at the prison that this rapist was assigned to, and the Scottish Prison Service, made a mistake. And Nicola Sturgeon sort of backed them and then sort of didn't back them, because she's in a real problem here. What she's proposing, this reform, which is a modest reform about birth certificates, is deeply unpopular in Scotland. And she's never yet faced an issue where she's been in a fight with the UK government, and this time a Conservative government, in which the Tory government are speaking for Scottish voters, and Nicola is speaking for a minority within her party. And that, I think, is a huge crisis for her.
Now, Nina, am I right in thinking that the Gender Reform Bill, one of the amendments that was put forward, was to prevent such things as the case of Adam Graham from happening? There was an amendment that was put forward that convicted sex offenders could not then be placed, or would not be able to change their gender in such a way as to be able to be in a women's prison, for example, and it was voted down, I believe.
Yeah, I think we see this kind of, mishandling of the law all over the place. We also see it with charities such as Mermaids and Stonewall, who are giving incorrect legal advice to institutions who are then acting as if something untrue is the case, right? So this is very serious, and I think the law needs to be extremely clear. I think that UK Parliament was correct to try to block this Scottish reform. I think it's very obvious that sometimes countries and leaders can go wrong and get things wrong. And when you condense power, as John was saying, in a single figure, this is what happens. People stop listening.
And John, is there not something fundamental with the law, the issue with the Equality Act? Because the idea of self-declaration is obviously problematic in such cases as these, to say the least, in such cases as sex offenders, because essentially the Equality Act allows someone to change their sex legally. Do you think it should be amended in order to make sure that biological sex is safeguarded?
Well, look, for me, this is absolutely a case of really, really, really bad management in the Scottish Prison Service. The point of the prison service is to make sure that people serve their sentences when they're convicted. The deprivation of liberty is the punishment. When you're in prison, whether you're a man or a woman or a trans woman or a trans man, you should be safe from violence from other prisoners and from anybody else on the prison estate. And this is where there's been this massive confusion that there hasn't been a proper assessment of how to make everybody in this case safe. whether it is the rapist, whether it's the women in the jail, because I don't think it's going to be easy being a trans woman and an out trans woman and a convicted rapist in a male prison in Scotland. The safety of the prisoners is really important, but it seems that for Nicola Sturgeon, this became an issue of defending her legislation, which is, she knows it's flawed, because if she believed her legislation was fine, she'd say, see you in the Supreme Court to the UK government. She hasn't. She's turned it into this another reason why we need a referendum, which, for the SNP, if it's raining, it's time for a referendum. If it's sunny, it's time for a referendum. But this kind of obsession with every issue being about a referendum has hit an issue where the public are not convinced. Now, if Nicola Sturgeon wants to make major reforms like this and base them on a human rights framework, she needs to take the public with her. And I think she is smarting that Rishi Sunak and Alistair Jack, the Scottish Secretary, so the Tory Prime Minister, the Tory Scottish Secretary, are actually speaking for the Scottish voters, and she isn't. And this could well be a very big moment in Scottish politics.
Yeah, I think for a lot of women and people, it's more fundamental than anything that Nicola Sturgeon has been suggesting. The idea that one can just simply self-declare their gender flies in the face of common sense for so many women, and it dilutes, in my view at least, what it means to be a woman. Anyway, I must read out what the Scottish Prison Service spokesman has said. He says decisions by the SPS as to the most appropriate location to accommodate transgender people are made on an individualised basis, informed by a multidisciplinary assessment of both risk and need. Such decisions seek to protect both the well-being and rights of the individual, as well as the welfare and rights of others around them, including staff, in order to achieve an outcome that balances risks and promotes the safety of all, and that is exactly what has happened in this case, one might say, after huge amounts of media pressure. Anyway, moving on to a new topic. In order to fill vacancies in the British economy, the government is reportedly planning to allow foreign students to work longer hours. Students from overseas are currently limited to 20 hours of paid work a week, but discussions are underway to raise that limit to 30 hours or to remove it altogether. However, the plans threaten to undermine Home Secretary Suella Braverman's pledge to reduce the foreign student numbers in the UK, as the plans could make these visas more attractive to those wanting to work here. Nina, I'll go to you first. What's your initial thoughts on this? Do you think it's a good idea to let students on their visas over here work as long as they like?
Well, I don't really have too much of a problem with this, to be honest. I think UK universities have bigger problems on their hands, namely attracting enough good foreign students to come and study here, because I think the reputation of UK universities is in danger precisely because they are increasingly perceived to be disallowing free speech and genuine inquiry. So that's a bigger problem from my point of view, but I used to work in universities. I don't see any particular problem. I mean, there is a kind of problem when students don't have enough money and they do too much work, so they don't study enough. But I don't think this is the issue to be worried about, to be honest.
Well, John, we have seen cases of sort of sham courses being set up, essentially as a way for people to usurp the normal system and get in and work here and then live for many years afterwards. Essentially, it's a way to come into this country that can be abused. Do you think it's right that Suella Braverman is at least seeking to address that issue?
Well, look, I think all immigration systems have loopholes and they're exploited by people who want to be in the UK. And look, it's not an ignoble ambition to want to live in the UK. We're the greatest country in the world. I'm not surprised a lot of people want to come and live here. What I think is at the centre of this decision is something very interesting. It's the confusion. What do the government actually think the role of universities is? Is it to be a driver of the economy, and therefore you want to bring the best and the brightest from all of our communities, but actually try and attract globally the best international students? Because we know that Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, the growth there has been driven by massive migration of the top talent from all around the world to America. We need to have a part of that if we're going to be a successful post-Brexit country. But then you have this other push, which is we should be limiting the number of people. I mean, what was it? 504,000 was net migration last year. That's a lot of people. That is not all students. And then there's the final thing, which we've touched on, which is, I mean, once you start, if you take a cap off it, if you raise it to 30 hours, in a sense, you've got people doing a full-time job, nearly a full-time job, and doing a full-time course. That's going to be hard on them, hard on their studies, and maybe hard on the people they study with. So what is the role of the university in the 21st century is a huge question for me. I think it's a massive driver of levelling up. If it's not like Sunderland University, I think educates local people and it creates local businesses and spin-offs from it. So how do we get that bit right, rather than this feels like it is, we're getting in the foreign students, we're charging them high fees, they can't quite afford the high fees, we need the high fees, we need to change the system to let them earn enough money to pay the high fees we're charging them. Now, that's starting on the basis we should be making people pay the high fees. Well, shouldn't we be starting with what the point of a university is?
Well, I think there are many different points to what a university is, but at the moment, many vice-chancellors, university chancellors would tell you that they don't have enough money. And of course, the freeze in tuition fees is one of the reasons for that. But of course, many people do not want to be spending more than £9,000 as a domestic student on a service that may well be disrupted. University workers are currently going on strike. So that's another thing that's damaging the reputation of some of our universities, arguably. But the government has framed this, Nina, as something that would be a boost to the economy. Surely, some foreign students being able to up their hours isn't the key to our future productivity and success.
No. I think the numbers are too small. It's kind of an irrelevancy. I mean, this sort of fiddling with numbers doesn't address sort of genuine concerns about how we relate to the rest of the world, our own economy. John's very good point about what a university is for. All of these things are kind of, much bigger questions. And a few foreign students working a couple more hours is not going to touch that.
Yes, John, I do think, well, this is moving away from the question slightly, but universities, do you believe they are too dependent on foreign students?
It's a good question. I think they are too dependent on fees to survive in the modern world, and there's a mismatch there, which is we've got something going wrong in the system where the pensions aren't affordable by the universities. The pay for university lecturers is uncompetitive compared to other things, and therefore you're not getting the supply of excellent teachers coming into university. And you've got the situation where we have students emerging with massive debt onto a labour market where they have to pay high rents, and if they're being squeezed out the possibility of owning a home. And there's something going wrong when young people doing the right thing, improving their skills, end up in a situation where they can't get themselves the kind of good life that previous generations got, which was a good job, save a deposit, buy a house, and just get on the ladder of life. And I think that for me is the worry, that this is an integrated problem. It's not this, you can't take one element of it and try and solve it. Every single piece seems to be contributing to it being more difficult than it should be. So, I'm hesitant to call for royal commissions, but it needs a proper thinking through rather than this initiative. And absolutely, I don't believe more foreign students in bars and restaurants is a solution for the UK productivity and growth problem.
No, well, all I can say is I'm glad that I didn't have to pay £9,000 a year. I think I was the last year of the £3,000 a year, which will make a difference. I imagine many students will never pay back their student loans at all, so it won't even go back to the Treasury. Anyway, moving on to our final debate. Actor Alan Cumming has returned the OBE he was awarded in 2009 as part of the Queen's birthday honour list. In a post on Instagram, the actor said how he opened his eyes to the toxicity of the British Empire, saying his soul-searching was prompted by the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the conversations the event sparked. John, are you going to go all woke on me in this and say we should all hand back our OBEs? They're a relic of the past. I'm going to go and work on this.
It's time to end the OBE and the CBE and the MBE and the BEM. Let's take the empire out of our honour system, have a proper honour system, have an order of the UK, and you can be a member of the UK, you can have a whole set of ranks in it, but let's get rid of this imperial vestige. The British Empire and a disgraceful history is one we should be apologising for, not celebrating.
Well, hang on, Nina. It had a mixed history, some might say. And do we want to do away with tradition just because a few people find it offensive?
No, I don't think so. And I think we have to see this in the context of a kind of celebrity gesture that may have other motivations. I think the more pressing question, for example, would be one of censorship. So Nigel Biggar, who's recently attempted to write a balanced book about empire, has been censored by his publisher, which was reported today. And I think, let's have a discussion about empire. Empire is a lot longer than the 18 years or however since Alan Cumming received his OBE and accepted it in the first place. So I think there are kind of serious questions we could have about the legacy, about the meaning, about how we relate to our own country if we're born here or if we live here. But yeah, I'm not in favour necessarily of scrapping tradition. I think we need to ask questions about which traditions are meaningful and to who.
I must say the publisher denies that. I must say, Nina.
Right. So yes, sure. Let's say it's an ongoing question, but Nigel Biggar has described his attempt to get this text, which was originally accepted, published. It's an ongoing case. It seems clear. But I think, it's obvious that when people do try to have a balanced discussion about empire, that they run into trouble quite quickly. It's very fashionable to simply say, oh, no, it was all wrong, it was all evil. And it's very hard to say that about many things in human history. Some things we will condemn unequivocally, and some things are more complicated.
I just think it was just a way for this particular actor to get a bit of press. It does seem as soon as you make a trendy opinion apparent in the media, you get lots of free press, and I'm sure he'll be invited to some more awards ceremonies and whatnot. Anyway, we must finish there. That was, of course, political strategist and former political secretary for Tony Blair, John McTernan, with us, and the senior editor at Compact magazine, Nina Power, in the studio. Thank you very much indeed. I believe we are now going to a break.
Hello there, hope you're enjoying your weekend so far. I'm Jonathan Vautry, here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. We will increasingly see the winds strengthen across northern areas of the UK into Sunday, but for now, winds are relatively light thanks to high pressure that's pushing its way across the UK. We do just have to watch out for this cold front that's slowly sinking southwards. It is bringing some patchy rain and drizzle to some areas, and that will move its way into Wales, central areas of England into this evening, but it is remaining fairly cloudy throughout the night. There could be some clearer spells during the evening across Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland, northern England that will allow a patchy frost to develop, but as the cloud fills its way in and the breeze begins to strengthen, we will see temperatures more around low single figures in most towns and cities. But into the start of Sunday morning, this is when we'll really start to see those winds strengthening across the northwest as a more expansive area of rain begins to push its way in. This could certainly be heavy at times as we start off the day. Elsewhere, once the rain and drizzle does eventually clear its way off to the south, Sunday will be a largely dry day, but another cloudy one, just the odd bright spell here and there. Temperatures-wise, holding up around 8 to 9 degrees across southern areas, but actually 10, 11, maybe even 12 degrees for the likes of Aberdeen with those winds coming up from the south. Into tomorrow evening then, that frontal system is going to gradually push its way across many areas. We'll see some clearer spells develop behind that, but also a rash of showers pushing in for Scotland, 50-mile-an-hour gusts associated with these showers and some hail in there as well. But by the time we get to Monday morning, that front will eventually clear its way off across southern areas. So for many of us, the start of the new working week is looking like a fairly pleasant one with some sunny intervals in there. That's thanks to the ridge of high pressure, but as we move throughout the rest of the week, our attentions turn to this low pressure centre, and that squeeze in the isobars across Scotland could provide some fairly blustery and windy conditions, particularly towards the end of Tuesday. So do just watch out for that. Goodbye.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 3 p.m. Welcome to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on TV, online and digital radio. Now, plenty more coming up on today's programme, but first, we have to go to the news with Bethany Elsey.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 3 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. 276 Flybe staff have been made redundant, with the airline going into administration for the second time in 3 years. Around 75,000 people have had their bookings cancelled, and the UK Civil Aviation Authority is urging the courier's customers not to travel to airports. Flybe returned to the skies last April after it collapsed in 2020, operating flights on 21 routes to 17 destinations. The Sun's travel editor Lisa Minow is confident the workers will find new jobs.
Flights are hugely in demand, and what we saw last summer, of course, was the fact that actually flights were having to be restricted because they didn't have enough staff. Airlines are desperate now for staff, so I think it's going to be, a positive story and a positive outcome for the 240 employees of the new Flybe. I think they will definitely get jobs very quickly because, as you say, as a whole, the sector is really recovering well. There's a huge demand for travel, even with this cost of living crisis.
A murder investigation has been launched after a 15-year-old girl was stabbed in Hexham. A 16-year-old boy is in hospital after suffering serious but not life-threatening injuries, with Northumbria Police saying it followed a suspected assault. The force says a 16-year-old boy has been arrested and remains in police custody. Sir Keir Starmer says Labour has reformed under his leadership. Addressing the London Labour conference, he told members the message at the next general election must be that the party is different to the one Britain rejected in 2019. He also warned against complacency and vowed to build a fairer, greener Britain, promising to put the country first.
Britain is crying out for change, crying out for decisive leadership, and we must provide it. Prove that we can be a bold, reforming government. Show not just what the Tories have done to Britain, but the Britain that Labour can build. A fairer, greener, more dynamic country, with an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the top, and a politics which trusts communities with the power to control their own destiny.
Former Minister Lord Peter Mandelson says Labour must stay focused on the election.
The biggest risk is that we think that the next election's in the bag, that we relax, we take it for granted. No, no, no. We have to maintain our absolute focus on voters, particularly those voters who have yet to be convinced that Labour does offer a credible, united, progressive alternative for our country.
The head of the RMT union says its members will make a decision on whether to accept the latest and final offer from the rail delivery group by the 8th of February. Mick Lynch says the union is holding discussions with members across the country over the next 10 days. But he told GB News the terms of the offer aren't great and he doesn't feel optimistic.
What we've got is a really poor offer. The pay offer is below less than half of the rate inflation over these 2 years. Inflation is running over 22–23% in the retail price index. This is 9% over 2 years, and we had no offer for 3 years before that. So our people are getting poorer, and at the same time their conditions and their working lives are being trampled all over. So I'm quite suspicious about what's going on, and I don't know if our members would be prepared to accept it.
Graphic body cam footage has been released in the US, showing police in Memphis beating a black man who died 3 days later. A warning some people may find the following video distressing.
Mom! Mom! Give me your hands!
29-year-old Tyree Nichols was kicked, punched and pepper sprayed as he cried out for his mother. 5 black officers have been sacked and are all facing murder charges. President Joe Biden says he's outraged and has called for an end to police misconduct. A former Conservative Party chair says a number of members feel they were denied a vote on Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister. In an interview with GB News, Sir Jake Berry says Mr Sunak should have held an endorsement vote during the leadership contest to show he had the support of the membership.
I think even though he absolutely got the majority of members of Parliament, the Conservative members of Parliament, and I support him as Prime Minister and everything he does, there is a challenge he has, is even if it's not true, there's a perception of the Conservative Parliamentary Party now being disconnected from our membership because we didn't have that, even if it was a sort of endorsement vote.
And you can see that full interview with Sir Jake Berry on Gloria Meets at 6 p.m. tomorrow. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Emily.
Yes, welcome back to Real Britain. Here's what's coming up on the show. Now, over 100 charities have written to the Prime Minister calling for an end to housing child asylum seekers in hotels, after about 200 reportedly went missing. Calling it a child protection scandal, the charities are calling on the government to find alternate housing for them and prevent children being trafficked into criminal gangs. What do you think? Send in your thoughts. And it's been reported that Prince Andrew had been kicked out of Buckingham Palace by his brother King Charles and told he must look for a new place to live if he wants to stay in London. Is this the right move from the King, or should he have kept Prince Andrew in the palace? Then, later on, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has warned it is unlikely that there will be room for any significant tax cuts in the budget. But with inflation coming down and natural gas prices plummeting, I'll be asking world-leading economist Shankar Singer if he thinks tax cuts could be on the table. Can we afford them? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on today's topics. Please do tweet me at GB News, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Of course, you can watch us online too on YouTube. I'll be back in just one moment. Yes, more than 100 charities have called for an end to housing child asylum seekers in hotels. The news comes after the immigration minister said about 200 child migrants, mostly teenage Albanian boys, had gone missing since 2021. Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, said, "We've had stories of gangmasters turning up at hotels that they know asylum seekers are staying at, taking people away. It is for very obvious reasons very hard to protect people in that kind of environment, so we have to address this." So should child migrants not be kept in hotels? If not, where should they be kept instead? Joining me in the studio is Stephen Wolfe, who's the director for the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity think tank. And we have immigration lawyer from law firm Privatus, Ivan Sampson. Now, Stephen, you're in the studio with me this afternoon. I mean, I've seen these hotels. There are some that are local to me, and there doesn't seem to be much security at all. It's not surprising, really, that some children, those under the age of 18, have either absconded or been snatched.
Well, there's no proof that anyone's been snatched, and there's no proof from the police reports both in Brighton and across the country, and indeed also supported by the Home Office, that there had been any trafficking, snatching, or indeed anyone involved in the absconding has been related to that kind of criminality. This has been a statement made by unnamed individuals who are whistleblowers to the press. And it's not surprising that there are those people who are wanting to try and use this, such as those charities, to try and drive a wedge into government policy. But what I would add is this. From the Missing Persons charity, they said in 2020, 1,200 children had absconded and 400 disappeared and have no evidence of where they've gone from our care homes. That's more than those in the hotels. Secondly, all those people who are in the hotels are giving exactly the same type of training and care responsibilities as those that the local authorities have in those care homes. And there is no difference in the policy of those care homes, the hotels, that allows those unaccompanied children to have freedom of movement in and out of those homes. So even if you were in a care home or anything run by a local authority, those same gangs, if it was true what Penny Mordaunt was saying, would be able to take those children away. There would make no difference. In fact, in many ways, they're safer in the hotels because there's more staff.
Ivan, can we say with certainty that these 200 child migrants are in fact children?
No, well, they've been assessed by social services under what's called the rules that they must have 2 social workers to assess and provide an age report to the Home Office. The problem is that when you get children who are 16 or 17, it's very difficult to make an accurate assessment. Quite often, and the government's own figures are, they get it wrong about 2/3 of the time. There are scientific methods we have to determine age. Unfortunately, the government's not using them, although they've been saying this for over 12 months, that they would bring them in. Every child should be age assessed, not just those where there's an age dispute. Because once a child is age assessed, the government has a duty of care under the Children's Act to take care of that child, to offer them supervision, accommodation and care and education until they're 18. So until we know how old a child is, even if a child is say under 10, let's say, where it's easy to say that's a child, every child should be age assessed, and the government is simply not doing that.
Ivan, for years we've had cases of child migrants not in fact being children and actually being placed in things like secondary schools. Why are these age assessments not, well, currently happening?
It's not working. The system that we have was set out through as a case called the Merton Principles, and that case set out the guidance that the Home Office use. So they are social workers to assess, and they use a combination of interviews and any documents they have. Not very accurate. We need proper assessment of every child who comes across. What worries me is this, Stephen's response that there's no evidence that these children are missing, there's no evidence how many are missing, there's no evidence they've been trafficked or absconded. Would he be saying that if they were white Ukrainian children? And I'm afraid there is definitely, because most of these children are from Albania or the other countries, Afghanistan and Iraq and those countries, that we seem to give them sort of second-rate treatment. Every child should be protected by this government.
Ivan,
who
I must
claim
let
asylum.
Stephen come back on that, because you've accused him essentially of potentially being, well, I wouldn't want to say racist, xenophobic in one way or another.
Well,
no, it's discrimination, is what I call it. I wouldn't call it racist. What I call
on the basis of on the basis of where they come from. Stephen.
Well, on the basis, I did not say they weren't missing. What I did say, there is no evidence that they have been abducted or people trafficked, because the police have suggested that there is no evidence to that. The Home Office has made very clear statements to that. There is clear evidence that they are missing. But I also made very clearly, Ivan, a statement that 1,200 children have been removed or gone missing from care homes across the country. Now, I don't know the colour, race or creed of any of them. My concern is that there should be people looking after those children, and whether you want to take them from hotels to care homes, the same issue of people going missing will occur with them. It is nothing to do with the colour. It's about the fact that these people will still go missing wherever they are. And if they're involved with Albanian gangs, as 88% of these children are supposedly involved, that's the issue. We should be tracking down those Albanian gangs and identifying what deals have been done in order to bring those children over and make them claim themselves as being children.
Ivan,
the difference in treatment is that the initial policy of putting children into hotels was a temporary measure. 18 months on, we're still putting children in hotels. Now, that's a breach of this government's duty of care towards these children. And so the government has failed.
May I just ask a question, Ivan? Well, that gets to the crux of this conversation. Where should they be staying if they're not in hotels? Because obviously we've had huge numbers of people crossing the channel. Indeed, I believe there were 1,000 in one day just the other day. Where do these people go? Where can they go if not hotels?
Well, if they are children, and this is a problem where the government's getting it wrong, assessing these individuals' ages. But if they're genuine children, they should go into foster care or temporary foster care and eventually permanent foster care if possible. They need to be sent to school, they need to have a proper education and given all of the opportunities that are required under the Children's Act, which the government is obliged to do. It's a statutory provision.
But Steve, I mean, people will be listening to this and thinking, well, there are many British children waiting for foster care, waiting in our social care system, who haven't been placed in housing yet, who haven't been placed with a family. Why should children who have come over the channel be prioritised?
Well, I don't think they should be prioritised. And the first point that occurs before you go into foster care is you're assessed in care homes, which goes to point one, the children can disappear. Secondly, there is not enough foster carers across the country to actually deal with those children who are currently in the system they're in. We also have 250,000 people living in bedsits who have children too, who are not being looked after. Perhaps one of the things that Ivan ought to do is offer himself to be a foster carer and take one of those children in, as does those who support the policy of taking them out of hotels. I don't see them running quickly to the doors of either the Department of Health, the Home Office or any other agency offering themselves up with those circumstances. The very difficult decisions governments are making is based on the fact there is not enough space in the hotels and they have to find a way. Yet they're offering £15,000 a year for every child that is taken into a local authority. That is more than much money being given to those who are currently in the foster care system.
Now, Ivan, lastly, of course, we wouldn't have this issue if the government were able to stop the small boats from coming over in the first place. What would the first thing you would do? What would be the first thing you would do if you were in charge of the Home Office, in charge of the government, to stop the boats from coming across? Then we wouldn't have children absconding or being trafficked or being stolen, kidnapped from hotels.
We need a bilateral treaty with France. We need a wider treaty with the countries that border France as well. This is an international problem. If you're going through a country where you can seek asylum, you should seek asylum there. We need proper channels of way for people to claim asylum without physically being in this country. And we need annual quotas to take refugees. We don't take enough refugees. That is the problem. We should be taking at least 100,000 refugees every year, equivalent to other countries of our size and wealth. But we don't. The difference is that they're more visible coming in boats. They've been coming across on the same numbers for the last decade. Before it was on lorries, now it's on boats. We can see them. Now it's hitting headlines. But I'm glad it is, because this problem needs to be resolved.
Steve, very quick final word.
Well, I would certainly not have an open door to a system where we bring in migrants from across the globe into the UK without an international agreement. I can agree with Ivan on this, but first of all, it must be beginning with the amendment of the UN refugees to actually deal with the definition of illegal migration rather than those who are genuine asylum seekers. We must remove ourselves from the European Court of Human Rights and amend the slavery laws and the Human Rights Act to look at the modern situation we have vis-à-vis the Albanians who are using it just to allow themselves to come across here when clearly they are not genuine refugees. And thirdly, there is no way in this decade that France will ever agree to an agreement with us, which means that migrants stay in their country rather than come across to us.
Well, there you go. Two very different approaches to the problem. Please do at home let me know who you agree with. That was, of course, Stephen Wolfe, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, and Ivan Sampson down the line, immigration lawyer. Thank you very much indeed. Now, later on in the show, we'll be discussing the decision made by Hackney Council to introduce 6 more low-traffic neighbourhoods, which will ban most cars from driving through 75% of its roads. There's lots of bicycles about, but no cars. And it got me thinking, there must be some other bonkers schemes put in place by local councils across the country. So I wanted to find out more. So I took to Twitter and asked, what's the most nonsensical thing your local council has done? Now, lots of you have sent in your council mishaps. Paul said, my council put 20-mile-per-hour speed signs up in a 10-yard cul-de-sac. Good use of money there, I think, Paul. Fabian says, my council gave out new, bigger food waste bins, but kept the liner bags at their original small size, so they didn't fit. Another epic fail from a local council there. Leslie said, my council put up several no ball games signs across my council estate. Everyone who lives here is 50, never once seen someone play a ball game. There you go, the little nanny state terrors, which are local councils. Anyway, Dan said, my council says it wants to ban meat in schools. Why? He asked. Well, why indeed? I heard meat is quite good for children. Keeps them strong anyway. Thank you very much indeed for sending in your views. We'll be discussing more council lunacy later on in the show, so do stay tuned. Sorry, I got a bit of a stutter there. Stay tuned till then. Now, plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. After the break, it's been reported that Prince Andrew had been kicked out of Buckingham Palace by his brother King Charles and told he must look for a new place to live if he wants to stay in London. Is this the right move from the King, or should he have kept Prince Andrew in the palace? But first, let's have a look at the weather now.
Hello there, hope you're enjoying your weekend so far. I'm Jonathan Vaughtry, here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. We will increasingly see the winds strengthen across northern areas of the UK into Sunday, but for now, winds are relatively light thanks to high pressure that's pushing its way across the UK. We do just have to watch out for this cold front that's slowly sinking southwards. It is bringing some patchy rain and drizzle to some areas, and that will move its way into Wales, central areas of England into this evening, but it is remaining fairly cloudy throughout the night. There could be some clearer spells during the evening across Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland, northern England that will allow a patchy frost to develop, but as the cloud fills its way in and the breeze begins to strengthen, we will see temperatures more around low single figures in most towns and cities. But into the start of Sunday morning, this is when we'll really start to see those winds strengthening across the northwest as a more expansive area of rain begins to push its way in. This could certainly be heavy at times as we start off the day. Elsewhere, once the rain and drizzle does eventually clear its way off to the south, Sunday will be a largely dry day, but another cloudy one, just the odd bright spell here and there. Temperatures-wise, holding up around 8 to 9 degrees across southern areas, but actually 10, 11, maybe even 12 degrees for the likes of Aberdeen with those winds coming up from the south. Into tomorrow evening then, that frontal system is going to gradually push its way across many areas. We'll see some clearer spells develop behind that, but also a rash of showers pushing in for Scotland, 50-mile-an-hour gusts associated with these showers and some hail in there as well. But by the time we get to Monday morning, that front will eventually clear its way off. across southern areas. So for many of us, the start of the new working week is looking like a fairly pleasant one with some sunny intervals in there. That's thanks to the ridge of high pressure, but as we move throughout the rest of the week, our attentions turn to this low pressure centre, and that squeeze in the isobars across Scotland could provide some fairly blustery and windy conditions, particularly towards the end of Tuesday. So do just watch out for that. Goodbye.
Sundays on GB News from 9:30, it's Camilla Tominey.
For a politics show with personality.
Then at 11, Michael Portillo.
For topical discussion, debate, some ethical dilemmas, and sometimes even a sense of the ridiculous.
And at 1 p.m, me, Alistair Stewart. Every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind, and we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
and right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back. This is Real Britain on GB News, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, the King has made clear to Prince Andrew that Buckingham Palace is no place for the Duke of York, according to a royal source. Prince Andrew has reportedly been forced out of his flat in the palace after having his office there closed last year. The news comes as rumours suggest Andrew is planning to launch a legal challenge against Virginia Giuffre after he settled with her over her civil sexual assault case. He has always denied Giuffre's claims and did not accept culpability in the settlement, of course. Now joining me is royal commentator Michael Cole. Do you think this royal source is correct, Michael?
Emily, those people at Buckingham Palace, oh dear, they're going to be pulling their hair out at this development that this case should be climbing out of its coffin and throwing a shadow across the coronation, which is only 98 days away now. You will remember that lawyers acting for Prince Andrew last year, within a year, entered into freely an agreement in a Manhattan courtroom to pay substantial sums of money. This was a civil case settled by money, the exchange of, known as damages. It wasn't a criminal case, which is settled by jail time on conviction. And a sum said to be 12 million, 10 million, 7 million, or even 3 million was paid to Mrs. Giuffre, who now lives in Australia with her Australian husband. And that was thought to be the end of it, and it was thought to tidy the matter away before the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. But now it's coming back, and the Prince, it is said, is going to challenge this agreement that he freely entered into. Now, if he's going to do that, he's going to have to prove that there was some sort of fraud or coercion or duress or some sort of malicious falsehood. Now, the judge in Manhattan isn't going to like the fact that his court was used in that way to agree this agreement. So what will happen remains to be seen. We have very, very interesting developments. And if you'll allow me to speculate, I will speculate about why Prince Andrew thinks he has a case of overturning a settlement which he fully and freely agreed last year.
Please do.
Well, it seems to be that Mrs. Giuffre, who at a 17-year-old was Virginia Roberts, and she said she was sexually abused by Prince Andrew in London, in New York, and on the island of Little St. James in the Caribbean. She, at the time, also accused a man called Alan Dershowitz. Now, Alan Dershowitz is a very famous lawyer in America. He defended Klaus von Bülow. He also defended O.J. Simpson, and he's a professor of law at Harvard. And he said immediately that the accusation against him was false. And subsequently, Mrs. Giuffre did remember that she'd falsely remembered, and she agreed that she'd identified him wrongly. So I think probably the lawyers of Andrew are going to try and say that if she remembered Mr. Dershowitz wrongly, then perhaps she remembered Prince Andrew wrongly. And it all comes down to that famous photograph allegedly taken in the Belgravia Mews house of Ghislaine Maxwell, with the prince apparently having his hand around the bare midriff of the 17-year-old Virginia Roberts, with Miss Maxwell in the background smiling, and the photograph, a flashlight photograph, apparently taken by Jeffrey Epstein. Now, what has happened subsequently, and this is interesting, Ian Maxwell.
Of course, Michael, I must say that, of course, she's not here to defend herself. We must put that aside for balance's sake and for legal reasons, of course. May I get you quickly on the Telegraph's front page today, which I'm sure you've seen, the exclusive story, the photo of Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers, which they claim shows the bath sex allegation against Prince Andrew could not have happened. What do you make of that?
Well, it's bizarre, and that's what I was trying to tell you. Ian Maxwell, a loyal brother of Ghislaine, said this photograph was taken when she was facing justice in New York last year, and she was sentenced to 20 years, if you remember, for trafficking young girls. He said that that was taken to prove, with a couple of models taking the places of Prince Andrew.
Michael, I'm so terribly sorry. I've got, we have to end the interview there because we have to go to the news bulletins. But as ever, I'd love to speak to you again very, very soon. That was, of course, royal commentator Michael Cole. Sorry to interrupt you there. You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. After the break, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has warned it is unlikely that there will be room for any significant tax cuts in the budget. But with inflation coming down and natural gas prices plummeting, I'll be asking world-leading economist Shankar Singham if he thinks tax cuts could be on the table. But first, let's get the news headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 3:30. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. 276 Flybe staff have been made redundant, with the airline going into administration for the second time in 3 years. Around 75,000 people have had their flights cancelled, and the UK Civil Aviation Authority is urging customers not to travel to airports. Flybe returned to the skies last April after it collapsed in 2020, operating flights on 21 routes to 17 destinations. A murder investigation has been launched after a 15-year-old girl was stabbed in Hexham. A 16-year-old boy is also in hospital after suffering serious but not life-threatening injuries, with Northumbria Police saying it followed a suspected assault. The force says a 16-year-old boy has been arrested and remains in police custody. The head of the RMT union says its members will make a decision on whether to accept the latest and final offer from the rail delivery group by the 8th of February. Mick Lynch says the union is holding discussions with members across the country over the next 10 days, but he told GB News the terms of the offer are really poor and he doesn't feel optimistic. And Sir Keir Starmer says Labour has reformed under his leadership. Addressing the London Labour conference, he said the message at the next general election must be that the party is different to the one that Britain rejected in 2019. He also vowed to build a fairer, greener country and told members not to be complacent. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Emily will be back with you in just a moment.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this
you
morning.
even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on
Absolutely.
Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Real Britain on GB News, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, the Chancellor has said it is unlikely that there will be significant tax cuts in the budget and that he will prioritise tax cuts for businesses once there is the headroom to do so. He added that the best tax cut right now is a cut in inflation, as he reiterated the government's pledge to halve inflation. He also added that the UK must take advantage of Brexit freedoms to boost the economy and warned against economic doom and a declinism mentality. So is now not the time for large tax cuts, and has the government wasted opportunities provided by Brexit? Joining me is Shankar Singham. He is the CEO of Competere and the former advisor to the UK Trade Secretary and the US Trade Representative. No one better to talk to on this, Shankar. Firstly, on the tax cuts issue, he spoke about how we shouldn't be doom and gloom about the economy, but presumably having a very high tax burden, which dilutes our tax competitiveness on the international stage, at least, is a bit of a gloomy thing to do as Chancellor.
Yes, well, great to be here, Emily. And I think the issue with taxes, you have to look at the whole thing in the round. So, the Chancellor talked about economic growth, he talked about enterprise, he talked about productivity. And obviously there's a tax component to all of those things. And he needs to show progress, real progress in all of these areas. You are absolutely right. The tax burden in the UK at the moment is extremely high, and it's particularly high for businesses. And it's not just about the corporate tax rate. It's about, particularly for small businesses, it's about all the other taxes that they have to pay, the sort of corporate taxes, the payroll taxes, etc. And for a lot of small businesses, their individual founders and owners are also paying very high income tax rates. So if you look at the overall tax burden for a entrepreneurial firm, and we're trying in the UK to have more entrepreneurial firms, he's talked about Silicon Valley and so forth, you need clearly to lower the overall tax burden that people feel. The timing of that, though, it is a matter of discussion. But it isn't only taxes. I think sometimes we get into this discussion and it's just about taxes versus no tax changes. And actually, there is a lot that needs to be done on regulatory reform, lowering the cost of people's food and transportation, housing, which is all about regulatory reform. That is also, in addition to inflation reduction being a tax cut, regulatory reform can also be regarded as a tax cut. Giving our businesses the ability through our trade policy to accede to access, more markets on better terms will cause businesses to thrive, and that's what will help you with your productivity. So it's all of these factors are linked together, and if you miss one or you get one wrong, the tendency then becomes that the whole, instead of a virtuous circle, you end up with a vicious cycle going down. And unfortunately, and the way this is shown is the productivity numbers. So we've seen lagging GDP per capita in the UK compared to countries like fast-growing countries like the US and North America and Asia typically. And then the final point I'd make on this is, you mentioned he talked about declinism and some of the numbers that people were throwing around. If you benchmark yourself against sluggish states like, France and Germany and European member states that aren't growing that fast, you're not really saying that you think Britain can be the best in the world. If you really think Britain can be the best in the world, you'd be benchmarking yourself against the fast-growing countries that are comparable. I mean, I'm not talking about small developing countries. I'm talking about the US. I'm talking about countries like Australia and so on, where you've seen, going back even before the financial crisis, for decades, pretty sluggish GDP per capita growth in the UK. So that's what he needs to focus on. And is tax part of that? Absolutely, it's part of that, but it's not the only thing.
Yes, he talked about seizing Brexit freedoms, the benefits of Brexit. A lot of people, according to the polls, there's quite a lot of Brexit regret going about. And I, for one, think it's down to the fact that the government hasn't seized those Brexit opportunities. Is Jeremy Hunt the man to do the job? And what should he focus on if he's only got 2 years in the job?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand that Brexit by itself, leaving the European Union by itself, doesn't cause anything, magical to happen. You've just left the EU. That's all you've done. What you do now, what kind of country you want to be, what you want your regulatory system to look like. Now you've got control of your laws, what you want your border management to look like, what you want your trade policy to look like, how you want to interact with your trading partners. All of this is the next stage, right? So if you don't do anything on the next stage, you aren't going to see any benefits. And all you're going to have is the disruption costs of leaving the customs union and the single market of the EU. So I think if you look at what the UK has done since the actual leaving of the EU, we've seen some good things on trade policy. I think they are looking at the right types of countries. They are doing the right types of agreements. I would give them, a 6 out of 10 for that. I think you need to look into whether the agreements are truly liberalising, and I think there's some questions there. if you look at border management, things like the single trade window, all of these things, the great ambition to have the best border in the world by 2025, which needs to be backed by reality, and needs, concrete things to be done at speed, I'd probably give them a 6 or 7 out of 10 there. But the big issue, the big mover on economic development and growth is in your domestic regulatory reform. Trade and border management will give you gains, but, they'll be some way off. Whereas regulatory reform can give you much more immediate gains. I mean, I think what Hunt has to do and what the government has to do is deliver to working families lower prices for their energy, their food, their clothing, their housing, all of these things. That's all in the regulatory reform bucket. And apart from some financial services reforms, which were a good start, we've had very little there. We've had, I'd give them a 2 out of 10 maybe for that. And we need to have a lot less talking about regulatory reform and a lot more actual reform. Now, the good thing is that we have the retained EU law bill going through. That is the first step. The way to think about that is that's the first step on a ladder. The ladder has to be climbed, and it gets progressively harder the higher up you go. Reform is hard. Liz Truss discovered how hard reform is. And it is hard, and the government has to be brave, to do this over the next 2 years. And I would say that, the British people demonstrated a significant amount of bravery and courage in leaving the comfortable arrangements of the EU. Now the government needs to back them with an equivalent amount of bravery and courage in facing down all the people who, will oppose reform, because they will oppose reform. If you are benefiting from the current system, and that system is damaging consumers and it's damaging working families, you're not going to suddenly shout out for reform. You're going to, in fact, block reform. So it does require a lot of effort and courage to do that, and that's what we need to see over the next 2 years.
Yes, I'm not sure that Jeremy Hunt screams at passion and boldness and risk-taking. I think it's going to be a bit more just management, crisis management, and I'm not sure we're going to have those bold moves that Liz Truss at least tried. But thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon on Real Britain. That was, of course, Shankar Singham, CEO of Competare, former advisor to UK Trade Secretary and the US Trade representative, of course, there. Now, moving on. Every day, more of us are facing the decision between heating and eating, but what about having to make a choice between feeding your children or feeding your beloved pet? In recent months, animal welfare shelters have been inundated with people who simply cannot afford to take care of their furry friends as they battle the cost of living. Our GB News North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper visited the Cats Protection Centre in Warrington to find out more.
The carefree life of a kitten. But with the cost of living at such a high, not everything is fun and games. 62% of UK households have a pet, whether it's a dog, a rabbit, a guinea pig, or a gorgeous cat like Periwinkle. Our animal companions are a huge part of so many of our lives. But with the cost of living still at crisis levels, could our pets be suffering too? I paid a visit to the Warrington branch of Cats Protection to find out what kind of impact the cost of living crisis is having.
We have had an increase on our waiting lists. So in care, we roughly look after around 150 to 200 cats across 2 centres per month, and we've had an increase of 20% across nationally as well as locally on our waiting list.
As more and more Brits struggle to cope with paying their bills and feeding their families, some are having to face the unthinkable, giving up their pet.
So what we would suggest, if somebody has found they're in that situation where they need to give up their animals, you can get in touch with your local adoption centre or branch, and that's what we're here to do, is to help. We help through adoption and rehoming animals. That's what we are here to help with.
Of course, giving up a pet should always be the last resort. But it's comforting to know that at places like Cats Protection, every single one of their feline residents is given the best care possible.
Hi. So right now I'm just having a lovely little cuddle with our chrysanthemum here, who came into the centre with a number of other cats from a multi-cat household. where the lady had been struggling to pay for the cost of neutering, so the number of cats had got out of control for her. So the next steps for him will be that he'll be neutered, he'll be microchipped, and when the vet's happy that he's fully recovered, we will find him a loving forever home.
As she played with Chrysanthemum, I asked Nicola if she'd noticed the impact of rising costs on pet owners.
The cost of living crisis is really showing at the moment. I would say the majority of the phone calls we get now at the centre are people needing to rehome their cats because they can no longer afford to look after them. And lots of families ring and tell me that if it's feed the children or feed the cat, then, it has to be the children that come first.
No family wants to give up their pet, but as prices peak and budgets break, some are being left without a choice. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Oh, the little furry friends left all alone. That was pretty moving package there from Sophie Reaper. Now, lots of you have been sending in your thoughts on the topics we've been discussing, as you always do. On our discussion about the Conservatives, Mark said, the Conservatives won't be spending time as the opposition because they will be known as the new Liberals come the next general election. I don't think Labour will get a majority either, as I believe Reform will hold the balance of power. Well, Reform will be very pleased with that. I think they've been getting high single figures. I don't think it's going to be enough to get them MPs, though. But who knows? Who knows? You might be right. Dee says, I could never vote Labour because they won't deliver a true and full Brexit, will never stop the boats, are globalists, and Starmer doesn't know what a woman is. Well, there's one strong view there from Dee. I think that's probably true, that they may well try and align us more and more with the European Union. I think they've been explicit in that, actually. Lee says, joining the EEC was the worst path the UK could have ever taken because the single market is restrictive. And Starmer would take the UK back into the single market after a sustained gaslit campaign by the media without a mandate. That's why I could never vote Labour. Seems Brexit is a massive issue for why you at home wouldn't consider voting Labour at the next election. I mean, Keir Starmer obviously wants you to forget that he very much campaigned for a second referendum and try to thwart the vote. But anyway, some people have short memories. And on government plans to allow overseas students to work longer hours, Ian says, the plan to increase the hours foreign students are allowed to work is highly dubious. If a full-time student is working 20 hours a week, they are probably not giving full attention to their studies. If the allowance is raised to 30 hours, they are definitely not studying properly. And any higher than that, they are a part-time student at best. Yes, I think if you were doing a difficult, intellectually challenging degree, you wouldn't be able to work over 30 hours a week, that's for sure. But there are some degrees that you could do in your sleep, perhaps. Anyway, thank you all for sending in your views. We're going to be moving to something equally controversial, which are the plans to expand low-traffic neighbourhoods, or LTNs, in the London borough of Hackney. They'll ban motorised through traffic from 75% of its roads. A public consultation still needs to be held about the proposal from the Labour-run council, but funding from Transport for London has been secured. The borough already has the highest number of LTNs in London, but clearly they still want more. Are LTNs a good idea, or are they causing unreasonable restrictions for motorists? Joining me now is Donna Chad McCarthy, who is climate columnist at The Independent, and Howard Cox, back again, the founder of Fair Fuel UK. Howard, I'll go to you first. I think I know what you think about LTNs. Are they a nonsense?
Yes, they're complete crass stupidity. And good afternoon, Emily. Fundamentally, this is a clueless thing, and it's totally politically motivated. It's nothing to do with actually so-called saving the planet. Donachie will no doubt attack me. He regularly does attack me on Twitter, calling me a mass murderer because I support, he says, fossil fuels. But the simple fact of life is that these sort of things, closing 75% of roads, is going to cause so much economic damage. It is a crass, stupid decision, and it's purely political, nothing to do with saving the planet.
Right, Donna Kerr, do you think LTNs have been a success story? Counter Howard for me.
Yeah, sure. They're not stupid and they're not party political. What they are is they're actually a step in the right direction for better neighbourhoods for families. The Imperial College University has done research on the 73 new LTNs that have been introduced in London over the last 5 years, and the results are amazing. The amount of crashes is down by over 50%. The amount of pedestrians injured or maimed or killed is down 85%. And the amount of traffic's down 50%, and with a very minimal rise in the boundary of roads. So what this is, what Howard is arguing for is reopening kids' streets to throughput of HGV trucks. And the Road Haulage Association sponsors Howard Cox's organisation, and this is a vested interest trying to destroy our kids' streets, and it's really not acceptable.
Howard, are you putting children at risk by campaigning against LTNs?
Yeah, well, this is classic Donach's, stupidity. I mean, we got RHA. Don't sponsor me anymore. You can stop all that mistruths you're passing around about me. The simple fact is that let's sit down and work together on the basis of getting a better road user transport system that is safe for everyone and for the economy. Let's face it, Hackney's in the middle of the capital of our town. It is a city. It's not a green belt area. So come on, get real, and you get off your horse and cart and start actually working with me to try and get a better future for all of us. You can smile as much as you like, Donachy, but you have been attacking me ruthlessly for too long now, and it's about time you actually take off my offer, sit down round the table, and let's try and work a way forward.
Well, there you go,
you asked him a question. Does LTNs reduce the amount of injuries and deaths to children and adults and pedestrians? He didn't answer the question. He came back with personal attack. If you look at his website, it's very clear. He says it's sponsored by the Road Haulage Association. It's on his website. I can't.
And Donachy, I thank you for mentioning that. Howard has had his say in return. I want to know what you think. You've said this is great for families and children, etc., etc. These LTNs, from what I've read and from research that people have done, reporting, local journalism, people have found that the LTNs are damaging the local economy. Businesses don't like them. It's pushing pollution to certain roads and making those roads more congested. So it's not actually cleaning the air. It's just shifting it.
That's not actually true. I'm not quoting a campaign group. I'm quoting the Imperial College and Westminster University studies, which have shown that the traffic is down, and by amazing amount, Emily, by 37% within the LTNs, and on the boundary roads, it's up by 1%, a tiny 1%. And as regards business, people like Howard and the road lobby and the HGV lobby always say it's going to impact businesses. Go to Waltham Forest. The town centres there are thriving since they introduced LTNs in Waltham Forest. It's a real success for businesses, for people and for kids. Why would you object to safer streets and better town centres? It doesn't make sense. The only reason why you'd argue for it is that the HGV trucks want rat runs through our family streets.
Well, hang on, I don't think that's fair. Howard, please, lastly, give us the last word. Why are people campaigning against these? I don't think it's because they want HGV lorries to be going 60 miles an hour next to a school.
Howard wants them. That's why he's campaigning.
No, Howard.
Well, again, he throws lies out all the time. He shows figures out. He says 50% that, 80% that. And I've checked his figures. They're pathological lies. But what's happening in the borough next door to Hackney is interesting. Tower Hamlets, they're removing low traffic networks because they recognise it's damaging the local economy. I said before, every single driver wants to breathe clean air and every single driver wants safer roads and streets. But Donachy, just in his myopic way and his usual way of attacking personally, I'm not attacking him personally, I'm telling him the truth.
Well, let's not have any personal attacks on this channel. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for joining us this afternoon to discuss LTNs. Obviously a very heated, passionate topic. Please do let me know what you think about it, but we have to finish there. You've been watching Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. Thank you very much indeed for your company. The show is on every Saturday at 2 p.m. I'll be back next week, I believe. But for now, I will leave you with the weather.
Hello there, hope you're enjoying your weekend so far. I'm Jonathan Vautry, here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. We will increasingly see the winds strengthen across northern areas of the UK into Sunday, but for now, winds are relatively light thanks to high pressure that's pushing its way across the UK. We do just have to watch out for this cold front that's slowly sinking southwards. It is bringing some patchy rain and drizzle to some areas, and that will move its way into Wales, central areas of England into this evening, but it is remaining fairly cloudy throughout the night. There could be some clearer spells during the evening across Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland, northern England that will allow a patchy frost to develop, but as the cloud fills its way in and the breeze begins to strengthen, we will see temperatures more around low single figures in most towns and cities. But into the start of Sunday morning, this is when we'll really start to see those winds strengthening across the northwest as a more expansive area of rain begins to push its way in. This could certainly be heavy at times as we start off the day. Elsewhere, once the rain and drizzle does eventually clear its way off to the south, Sunday will be a largely dry day, but another cloudy one, just the odd bright spell here and there. Temperatures-wise, holding up around 8 to 9 degrees across southern areas, but actually 10, 11, maybe even 12 degrees for the likes of Aberdeen with those winds coming up from the south. Into tomorrow evening then, that frontal system is going to gradually push its way across many areas. We'll see some clearer spells develop behind that, but also a rash of showers pushing in for Scotland, 50-mile-an-hour gusts associated with these showers and some hail in there as well. But by the time we get to Monday morning, that front will eventually clear its way off across southern areas. So for many of us, the start of the new working week is looking like a fairly pleasant one with some sunny intervals in there. That's thanks to the ridge of high pressure, but as we move throughout the rest of the week, our attentions turn to this low pressure centre, and that squeeze in the isobars across Scotland could provide some fairly blustery and windy conditions, particularly towards the end of Tuesday. So do just watch out for that. Goodbye.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News. I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m.